My name is Stella, a 32-year-old woman who has an unusual profession for some. I'm a fantasy writer. I'm not the kind of writer who's got their name plastered on billboards or anything, but I've got a solid group of readers who wait eagerly for my next book. I'm no J.K. Rowling or Stephen King, but I've carved out my own little corner in the world of fantasy literature. I've always been ambitious, always looking forward. I've never been one to settle for less, and I've worked hard to get where I am. Writing is my passion, my calling. It's what I was meant to do. There's something magical about creating new worlds, about bringing characters to life. It's hard work, but it's worth it. My husband, Mark, is a trader. He's not one of those Wall Street guys, but he works for a reputable trading company. He's good at what he does, and he's proud of it. We've built a comfortable life together. We're not rich, but we have everything we need. Mark is a practical man, always grounded in reality. He's the kind of guy who prefers numbers and facts over fantasies and dreams. He's always been supportive of my writing, but I don't think he's ever fully understood it. Lately, he's been distant, more interested in his phone than in me. I've tried to talk to him about it, but he just brushes me off. Then there's my sister, Lily. She's 22, a whole decade younger than me, and she's still in college. Lily is studying to be a psychologist. She's always been fascinated by the human mind, by what makes people tick. She's bright, ambitious, just like me. I've always been proud of her, always supported her. I've even been paying for her tuition. I thought we had a strong bond, but I was about to find out just how wrong I was. My parents, they're simple, hard-working people. They've always done their best to provide for us. They're not perfect, but they're my family. They've always been there for me, through the ups and downs. I could always count on them. Or so I thought. Life was going okay, I guess. I was busy working on my next book, juggling household chores, and trying to keep my marriage from falling apart. I was stressed, sure, but I thought it was just a phase, something we'd get through. Mark and I began to move away from each other. Each day was the same. He'd return from work, tired and irritable, his briefcase slapping against the wooden floor as he tossed it aside. His fingers would dance over his phone screen, a silent orchestra playing a tune only he could hear. Our conversations had been replaced by the dull hum of the television and the rhythmic tap of his thumb on the phone screen. "Mark, could you lend a hand with the dishes?" I asked one evening, my voice echoing in the kitchen. My fingers were pruned from washing and my back ached from hunching over the sink. My day had been consumed by crafting fantastical worlds, my mind teetering on the edge of reality and imagination. "In a bit, Stella," he replied, his eyes never leaving the glowing screen. His voice was distant, as if he was in another world, a world where I didn't exist. "But I've been working all day too," I protested. My words fell on deaf ears. His attention was elsewhere, swallowed by the digital vortex in his hands. Our conversations, once filled with laughter and shared dreams, had morphed into verbal duels. "You just don't understand, Stella." Mark would snap, his face contorting into a mask of frustration. His knuckles would turn white as he gripped his phone, his anger palpable. I'd stand there, rooted to the spot, my heart pounding in my chest. This wasn't the man I had fallen in love with. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of weaving tales and meeting deadlines, I found myself in the kitchen, stirring a pot of spaghetti. A wave of dizziness washed over me, the room tilting on its axis. I clung to the countertop, my knuckles turning white. "Mark," I called, my voice barely a whisper. I felt weak, my body betraying me. Silence. I turned, my vision blurring at the edges. He was there, on the couch, his phone, his constant companion, in his hand. Anger, hot and potent, welled up inside me. I was tired, I was unwell, and I felt alone in a house that was supposed to be a home. "Mark!" I yelled, my voice piercing the silence. he jolted, his eyes wide. What? He snapped, annoyance etched on his face. I'm not feeling well, I managed to say, my voice shaky. I need your help. He sighed, a sound that echoed throughout the room. He put his phone down and helped me to the couch. He returned to the kitchen, his movements mechanical as he finished cooking. I watched him, a bitter taste in my mouth. This wasn't the life we had promised each other. It was a day like any other, or so it seemed. I woke up feeling like I'd been run over by a train. My body was heavy, my head was filled with cotton, and I just felt wrong. I decided to get checked out, thinking it was just a nasty bug or something. But the doctor's words hit me like a ton of bricks. Cancer. Cancer? I echoed, my voice sounding small and far away in the sterile room. I felt the world tilt on its axis, my mind struggling to comprehend the news. Yes, Stella, the doctor said, his voice steady, his face a mask of professional sympathy. We need to get you started on treatment right away. I was admitted to the hospital that same day. My world, which had already been shaky, was thrown into complete chaos. I was terrified, I was angry, and I felt so incredibly alone. Mark showed up at the hospital after work. He was agitated, tense, and there was something else about him that I couldn't recognize. Maybe waiting? Stella, he stammered, his voice choked with emotion. I don't know what to say. I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in a long time. He was here, with me, and in that moment, I realized that we were in this together, for better or for worse. I didn't know then that my sense of hope was false. The days blurred into weeks. I started treatment, and it was brutal. I was always tired, always nauseous. But I was fighting. I was fighting for my life, for a chance to make things right. Mark was there, but he became different. He became fidgety, restless. He'd sit by my bed, tapping his foot incessantly, checking his phone every few minutes. He'd tell me stories to distract me from the pain, but his mind seemed to be elsewhere. I wish I could say that the diagnosis brought us closer, that it mended the cracks in our relationship, but it didn't. It just made everything more complicated, more difficult. My younger sister, Lily, had been making her rounds to the hospital. I'd like to think it was out of concern for me, but her visits quickly proved otherwise. One day, she plopped down in the visitor's chair, her eyes glued to her phone. Without looking up, she said, "You know my birthday's coming up, right?" "Yes, Lily," I responded, a bitter smile playing on my lips. "I haven't forgotten." "Well, I've been eyeing this designer bag," she continued, finally looking up to meet my gaze. Her eyes held an expectation that made my stomach churn. "I hope you got me something good." "Lily," I replied, my eyebrows knitting together in disbelief. "I'm in the hospital. I haven't had a chance to go shopping." She rolled her eyes, a scowl forming on her face. "You've always been so selfish, Stella. Always thinking about yourself." Her words were like a punch to the gut. But I swallowed the hurt, letting out a sigh before responding. "Lily, I love you, but the world doesn't revolve around you. I'm lying here, sick, and all you can think about is a designer bag? That's not right, Lily. You need to think about your priorities." Her face turned a bright shade of red, her eyes welling up with angry tears. She stormed out of the room, leaving me alone with my thoughts. A whole week passed. My husband, Mark, didn't call or visit. I tried reaching out to him, but he never answered. His silence was like a knife to my heart. How could he leave me alone in the hospital like this? Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, Mark walked into my hospital room one day. But he wasn't alone. Lily was with him, her arm looped through his. They were smiling, laughing, their behavior strikingly similar to that of a couple. "Mark, what's going on?" I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. Stella, he said, avoiding my gaze. Lily and we're together. The room spun around me. I looked at Lily, hoping to see some sign of remorse. But all I saw was a smug smile. Yes, Stella, she said, her voice dripping with arrogance. Mark and I are together. I felt a wave of anger wash over me. But instead of lashing out, I took a deep breath and said, "You're both adults, and you can make your own decisions. But you both betrayed me, and I won't stand for it." They didn't leave, oh no, they just stayed standing by the foot of my hospital bed. It was as if they were relishing the moment, savoring the sight of me in a hospital gown, weak and vulnerable. "You know, Stella," Mark started, his voice filled with a strange kind of glee. "You never really noticed me. Always had me doing the chores, never really cared about what I wanted." I looked at him, my eyes narrowing. "Is that so?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, his grin growing wider. "Oh, yes. But Lily here, she's different. She understands me, supports me." Lily was smiling too, her eyes twinkling with a cruel kind of joy. "That's right, Stella," she chimed in. "I'm not like you. I care about Mark." I felt a wave of anger wash over me, but I pushed it down. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me lose control. "What do you want, Mark?" I asked, my voice steady. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a set of papers. "Divorce papers," he announced, tossing them onto my bed. "I think it's time we ended this charade, don't you?" I picked up the papers, my eyes scanning over the words. Divorce. So, this was it. This was the end. I reached for a pen and signed the papers, my hand steady. Mark looked surprised. "That's it?" he asked, his voice filled with disbelief. "You're not going to fight it?" I shook my head, tossing the papers back at him. "No, Mark. I'm not going to fight it. You and Lily deserve each other." Lily let out a laugh, a cruel, mocking sound. "Well, Stella," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "At least now I get to live in your house." I felt a pang of hurt, but I didn't let it show. "Get out," I said, my voice cold. "Both of you. Get out of my room." They left, their laughter echoing down the hallway. As soon as they were gone, I reached for my laptop. I logged into my bank account and canceled the tuition payment I had made for Lily's college. She wanted to betray me? Fine, but she wasn't going to do it on my dime. Next, I blocked our shared bank account. Mark had made it clear that he didn't want to be with me anymore. Fine, but he wasn't going to get access to my money. Finally, I called my lawyer. "I need you to prepare the documents for the division of property," I said, my voice steady. "Mark and I are getting a divorce." My lawyer was silent for a moment, but then he said, "I'm sorry to hear that, Stella. I'll get everything ready as soon as possible." As I hung up the phone, I felt a strange sense of relief wash over me. I was free. Free from Mark, free from Lily, free from their betrayal. It was a bitter kind of freedom, but it was freedom nonetheless. But I wasn't going to let them break me. I was stronger than that. I knew then that I had to focus on my recovery, not just for my sake, but to show them that I was more than just a sick woman lying in a hospital bed. I was Stella, and I was a fighter. The hospital room was a whirlwind of activity. Doctors and nurses bustled about, their voices a constant hum in the background. Machines beeped and whirred, their noises a stark reminder of the battle I was fighting. A battle against a disease that was as relentless as it was ruthless. In the midst of all this chaos, my phone rang. The caller ID showed my parents' number. I hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Stella," my mother's voice came through the phone. "We heard about the divorce. And about Lily." I sighed, closing my eyes. Of course they had heard. News like that traveled fast. "What do you want, Mom?" I asked, my voice tired. We were wondering," she started, her voice hesitant. "Are you still going to pay for Lily's education?" I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "No, Mom," I said, my voice cold. "I'm not going to pay for the education of the sister who stole my husband." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then, my father's voice came through. "Stella, you can't be serious," he said, his voice filled with disbelief. "You can't just stop paying for her education." "I can, and I have," I replied, my voice steady. "I've already cancelled the transfer." "But Stella," my mother started, her voice pleading. "She's your sister." "She was my sister," I corrected her. "She stopped being that when she betrayed me." There was more pleading, more attempts to change my mind, but I wasn't having any of it. I ended the call, my heart heavy with a sadness I couldn't shake off. I had my laptop with me, a constant companion in these trying times. And it was on its screen that I began to pour out my feelings, my pain, my anger, my betrayal. Every word I typed was a testament to the storm raging within me, a tangible manifestation of the hurt I was feeling. The pain of my husband's betrayal was a raw, gaping wound. I wrote about it with a brutal honesty, detailing every moment, every conversation, every shared glance that I had overlooked before. I wrote about the shock, the disbelief, the denial, and finally, the acceptance. I wrote about how I had loved him, trusted him, and how he had thrown it all away for my sister. The pain of my sister's betrayal was a different kind of hurt. It was a betrayal of trust, of sisterhood, of shared childhood memories. I wrote about our shared laughter, our shared tears, our shared dreams, and how she had shattered it all with one selfish act. I wrote about the anger I felt towards her, the disappointment, the sense of loss. And then there was the pain of my parents' misunderstanding. The people who were supposed to be my pillars of support, my safe haven, were more concerned about my sister's education than my well-being. I wrote about the hurt their indifference caused, the loneliness, the feeling of being utterly alone in my struggle. Every word I typed was a catharsis, a release of the pent-up emotions threatening to drown me. I wrote about my pain, my anger, my betrayal, but I also wrote about my determination, my resilience, my will to fight. I wrote about the woman I was, the woman I had become, and the woman I aspired to be. In the midst of my darkest hour, I found my voice. I found a way to channel my pain into something creative, something powerful. I was no longer just a woman battling a deadly disease. I was a woman with a story to tell, a story of betrayal and resilience, of pain and strength. And so, I wrote. I wrote until my fingers ached, until my eyes grew heavy with fatigue. I wrote until the words stopped coming, until I had poured out every last bit of my heart onto the pages of my book. As I closed my laptop, a sense of calm washed over me. I had done it. The sterile silence of the hospital room was shattered when the door burst open. In stormed Mark and Lily, their faces twisted into masks of rage and disbelief. Their appearance was a stark contrast to the clinical white of the room, a violent disruption to the quiet hum of the machines monitoring my vitals. "What the hell, Stella?" Mark's voice echoed in the room, his words hanging in the air like a toxic cloud. He was waving a piece of paper in his hand, a bank statement that showed the halted payments for Lily's tuition. I looked at him, my eyes cold and unyielding. "It's a bank statement, Mark," I replied, my voice steady, even as my heart pounded in my chest. "You're a smart man. You can figure out what it means." His face reddened, his jaw clenching in anger. "You stopped the payments for Lily's tuition," he accused, his voice filled with outrage. "You can't do that." The sound of my laughter cut through the tension in the room. It was a harsh, bitter sound, devoid of any real humor. "I think you'll find that I can," I retorted, a smirk playing on my lips. "And I have. You two will have to sort out your own finances now." Lily, who had been standing silently by Mark's side, finally found her voice. "Stella, I need that money," she pleaded, her eyes wide with desperation. "I can't finish my degree without it." I turned my gaze to her, my eyes hard. "Well, Lily," I replied, my voice icy, "you should have thought about that before you decided to betray me. Actions have consequences." Mark was fuming now, his fists clenched at his sides. "You can't do this to us, Stella," he growled, his voice low and threatening. I raised an eyebrow, unfazed by his anger. "I think you'll find that I can," I told him, my voice calm and steady. "And just so you know, I'm selling our house. So, I suggest you start looking for a new place to live." The room fell into stunned silence, the only sound being the steady beep of the heart monitor. Mark and Lily stood there, their faces a picture of shock and disbelief. The reality of their situation was finally sinking in. Without another word, they turned and left, their footsteps echoing down the hospital corridor. The door closed behind them with a soft click, restoring the room to its previous silence. As I settled back into the hospital bed, a sense of relief washed over me. I had done it. I had stood up to them, stood up for myself. It was a small victory in the grand scheme of things, but it was a victory nonetheless. And as I closed my eyes, a small smile played on my lips. I was taking control of my life again, and it felt good. Months had passed since the confrontation with Mark and Lily. The bitterness of their betrayal had faded, replaced by a sense of peace and contentment I hadn't felt in a long time. I was cancer-free, the disease that had once threatened to take everything away from me now just a distant memory. I sat in my new house, a quaint little place that I had bought with the profits from my book. It wasn't as grand as the house I had shared with Mark, but it was mine. Every inch of it was a testament to my survival, my victory. My book, a tell-all about my journey, was a hit. People loved it, and the royalties were rolling in. I had even been featured on a couple of talk shows, sharing my story with the world. It was surreal, the way my life had turned around. One day, as I was sipping coffee in my kitchen, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Mark standing there, looking lost and defeated. He had lost weight, his clothes hanging loosely on his frame. "Stella," he started, his voice shaky. I need to talk." I looked at him, my eyes showing no sympathy. "What is it, Mark?" I asked, my voice devoid of any warmth. He swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. I messed up, Stella," he confessed, his eyes downcast. "Lily and we broke up. She's moved back in with your parents." I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. Karma had finally caught up with them. "And why should I care, Mark?" I asked, my voice cold. He looked up at me, his eyes pleading. I just wanted to apologize, Stella," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm sorry." I stared at him for a moment, taking in the sight of the man who had once meant the world to me. He was a shadow of his former self, broken and defeated, but I felt no pity for him. "Your apology means nothing to me, Mark," I told him, my voice firm. "You made your bed, now lie in it." With that, I closed the door in his face, leaving him standing on the porch. I returned to my kitchen, my coffee now cold. But I didn't care. The sweet taste of victory was far more satisfying. As I sat there, sipping my cold coffee, I couldn't help but smile. I had come out on top, stronger and happier than ever. I had survived the betrayal, the disease, and come out the other side a better person. I had tasted victory, and it was sweet. I had won. And as I looked around my new house, my new life, I knew that I had finally found my peace. I was content, happy. And for the first time in a long time, I was truly free. And so, my story ends here. Not with a bang, but with a quiet sense of satisfaction. A victory not just over my disease, but over the people who had tried to bring me down. A victory that was all the more sweet because it was mine, and mine alone. I had won. And the sweet taste of victory was all I needed.